Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Diverse Talent Development and Advancement Power Panel. I am Shanequa Fleming, the CEO of Culture Accelerators, and I get the amazing pleasure of having a conversation today with Jagina McIntyre, who's the Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager for Cleveland Clinic, and Donna Marshall, the Senior Director of Human Resources and Training for the Urban League of Broward County. And so first I want to say, hi, ladies, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you. Hello.
Awesome. So we're here, we're going to have a conversation on a critical issue that continues to be a challenge for so many organizations. And so the topic at hand, as you heard me say, is one that is of persistence, and it's really related to something that we've been diving into a little bit, but in many cases we see that organizations are still grappling with this, and it's really one of racial and gender equity gaps in the workforce. And so there's this common misconception that diversity, equity, and inclusion actually compromises competence. And so I want to kind of call that elephant to the carpet as we get started. And I want to clear that up, right, before we even get into it. And so our conversation today is to really amplify how diversity, equity, and inclusion, to the contrary, actually enhances competence. And so we're going to look at how it broadens the talent pool, how it fosters creativity, and how it helps to result in more effective decision-making and problem solving. And so our look at the value that diverse talent brings to an organization is going to really help organizations really see how this raises the bar for everyone. And so today I want us to explore this, and I want us to dive in deep. And so I want to begin, Donna and Jagina, by really putting the conversation in the context, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important that we start with, in 2022 to 2023, $101.8 billion was invested in training and development across industries. And in addition to that, $8 billion was allocated to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and initiatives. And so I'd like to start there because I believe numbers tell us a story. And if we're really going to have this conversation, we need to understand the significance of these numbers and what story it's telling us. And so I'd like to say there was a significant financial contribution made to training and development, and then even specifically to DEI efforts and initiatives. So then I want us to kind of dive in and say, so how can we really look at this to say, if we've made this investment, why are we still seeing gaps, right? Where are these gaps coming from? And so I want us to look at this in terms of, I think there's three things that we are going to really wrap around today when we look at the gaps. The needs that we really have as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, the processes and the practices that are really supporting what we're talking about, and the outcomes. So that's kind of just to give our audience a little bit of what we're going to dive into today. And I don't want to forget that if you have a question, everyone that has tuned in, there's a tab for you to drop your questions. And at some point towards the end of our discussion, we will dive in and answer any questions that you may have there. So with that, ladies, let's get into it. All right. So I want to start with a question that I want to, pose to both of you, both you, Jagina, and you, Donna. What are some of the underlying factors that you believe are contributing to what we see as gaps, if you will, as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how can organizations begin to address them more effectively at this juncture of where we are on the journey?
Well, Dr. Fleming, I'm going to start with, I really think that knowledge is power. And when you talk about metrics, most people think they know. They don't actually know. And I'm just going to jump into something that we've been doing at the Cleveland Clinic is with the assistance of our Chief Diversity Officer, we're actually sitting one-on-one with every executive team member. And we are presenting to them numbers at a level where they see and can impact. Right. You can change what's in your sphere of influence. And many times we find that we're talking about this $1 billion industry of things that need to change, and people are overwhelmed. They're like, I can't I can't impact that number. We're like, oh, no, you can't. And we get it down to a level where we go in and we show them their diverse representation across their management bands. We
Right.
show them their diverse representation across the different job categories that are available. And we're often amazed that they're like, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know my problem was right there within my reach to start to make a difference. And we're happy to see that the executive's response is always, what do you need me to do? Because I can affect this right here. And the metrics are powerful. And so we take that into that one-on-one space and open up the uncomfortable dialogue, which is, we didn't get here overnight. We know you're not sitting in your office going, I'm trying not to advance these folks. We want to help you by showing you the metrics that apply to you. And let's start the conversation there, because that's where you start pipelining. That's where you start saying, wait, I might have an issue with how I'm doing my diverse slate of hiring. We have to start the conversation somewhere. So we started in their own backyard. And that has been something that we've been doing over the last year. And I'm glad to say that we had a goal to just year over year, continually, aspirationally increase our leadership roles so that they mirrored our communities. And we're seeing the movement just by having the conversation and presenting the knowledge that we might assume you know, but maybe you didn't look out in your backyard yet. You haven't seen what we're going to uncover. So just having the dialogue is so important.
Thank you for that.
Dr. Fleming, excuse me, I would want to go in also to say you talked about the billions of dollars that were put into businesses over from 22 to 23. And now we're looking at the backtracking of that in some places, the pulling back of it. And it's not that there was an impact. I think the homogeneity of it all, if I could use that term and create that word, I want to just do that, is really saying to us that there has been great impact. Jagina, your metrics would have to be spot on, but if you don't want to change, you don't want to know the metrics, you pull back the dollars, you remove the positions because impact has been made. And so when I want to go out and say that we talked around, you spoke of 2022. I would tell you that around the beginning of 2022, our president and CEO saw the need to create a whole division called PAIR, which is Policy, Advocacy, Racial Equity. And from that perspective, that's how we have this amazing Kirsty Miles Esquire, who actually has been responsible for making sure, along with that team, making sure that we're still doing these conferences, because the effectiveness of the knowledge that's shared sometimes makes people uncomfortable. And you talked about the elephant in the room. It makes people uncomfortable, especially if you just want the same thing. If you don't want to do different, if you don't want to include, if you don't want any of that, then you keep doing the same thing. And I laughed and spoke with someone today and I said, the definition of insanity is you keep doing the same thing and yet you want to claim you want different results, but you're not doing anything different. So when you look at the pipeline, when you look at your boards, when you look at your leadership of organizations, it will speak volumes as to the intent of that company. And you will know whether or not there's going to be an effective change as it relates to ethnicity, whatever community, whatever culture you have. You can expect to see that if you are willing to address the elephant in the room and also be able to be uncomfortable with uncomfortable conversations.
Right. Those are really great, great points, ladies. I think the thing that when I hear you both talk about what you just shared, it brings me to this point of culture, right? And it brings me to culture is one of those things that I love to talk about because I think it's something that most people misconstrue or misunderstand. And we think that culture is this intangible that we can't quite touch or otherwise, wrap our arms around. And it's actually not so. You can actually measure everything. And so when I think about culture, I think about culture in terms of, what are those practices? How are we making decisions? What are those things that, really set the tone for how we do what we do and how does it guide and direct our business? And I often like to say what gets rewarded gets repeated, right? And so when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and even adding in belonging, and then if we really, really create a closer lens on that, and we talk about racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're starting to talk about what are those things that have been rewarded? What are those things that have been repeated? So they have now become systemic and they've become a way of doing business, not necessarily because everyone is just like tone deaf. Some people are, but it's really a matter of what's happening because this is the way that we've always done it. And so what we're talking about is really turning a tide and shifting culture, i.e. shifting attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, practices. And so when we look at that, it just reminds me of why I actually started Culture Accelerators in the first place. And it was all of the things that I was observing in workplaces that did not provide an environment where employees felt psychologically safe or valued. But there was an expectation to deliver and to perform. And so there's this need for transformative change. And so the conversation that we're talking about, it goes far beyond, it's not a project, it's not we use it and we couch it as an initiative or an effort, but it really is our responsibility as leaders to create a place where people can actually be at their best and perform in a way that really brings value, not just to the organization, but to the communities those companies and organizations are within. And so when I look at this, and as I heard what you were saying, it's been my experience, and I've made so many observations in the corporate world. And the reoccurring theme that I see is that employees often don't feel safe to express themselves, share their thoughts openly due to a fear of judgment or professional repercussions. Yes. And so this kind of causes a bit of stifling. So they're not being creative. They're not showing up as their authentic self, if you will. And so it comes to the point where it's creating stress in the work environment. And it's creating undue stress in the work environment, but it's also creating a space where well-being and mental health has really, really become a point of concern. And so I'm saying all of that to say, as I heard you, the question that came up for me is, what are some of the things that we really need to think about when it comes to fostering an inclusive culture, i.e. inclusive practices, decisions, behaviors that really govern the way we work and honestly help employees to feel like they're in a place where they can ultimately perform and they want to be there and stay there?
Well, Dr. Fleming, I love that question because obviously we tackle it every day. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we hear that you just touched on is that people, they don't want it to hurt their day job if they speak up against something or they say something. And we have incorporated employee resource groups like many organizations have. But one of the things that we are really fostering is the tough conversations. Mm-hmm. So I just went to a graduation ceremony that was for males, Black males specifically, that were graduating from a mentorship program. Mm-hmm. And other organizations were, how did you guys pull that off? And we're like, because we're having tough conversations. Mm-hmm. We need to move actual lives. In many cases, those gentlemen were one of only sitting in a room. The Cleveland Clinic is huge. So when they walk into a room, they were stifling how they communicated because they didn't want to be perceived as that angry Black male, or their opinion comes off as too aggressive, as we often hear about Black males. And as we start having these conversations, our Black Heritage Employee Resource Group sponsored that, but they took it to our leadership and said, this is what we're doing. We have a sponsor who's going to support this. And they got the backing. And that's what really shows, oh no, I get it. It's not about these high level numbers. We got to start somewhere, because each of those individuals, they then bring somebody else into the fold. They're each being mentored on how to get through a culture that isn't taught to you sometimes in the spaces that they come from. And I often tell people, when we come into the corporate world, for the first time ever, we are taking off a path that we haven't been taught. Mm-hmm. We start in kindergarten. They tell us what to do to make it to first grade. No matter what color you are, you got to all do the same thing. To graduate and get that high school degree, we know what the path is. I know what my grade needs to be. It doesn't matter if the principal of the school changes. It's still the same rules. Mm-hmm. You walk into a corporate environment, they go, okay, everybody on their own now. And you are now privy to only what knowledge you have been given. And we heard these men saying, I felt like I had to scrape and claw and look for knowledge. And there's no playbook being put in front of them. So we took it to leadership, and our employee resource group said, this is the playbook. We're about to put it out. And we want to be able to elevate a specific group of people so that we're announcing to the organization there's underrepresentation here. We're not going to sweep this message under the rug. It's a graduation specifically for those who are underrepresented in this space. And I'm going to tell you, it was powerful because when you talked about the mental health component of that, they talked to us about them having this separate mental health session. These cohorts didn't just go through how to get from A to Z. It's how to tackle that piece. It's different. It's different for you. You got to have that space where you have camaraderie with another group of individuals who know what you are going through. Mm-hmm. And they openly dialogued about it. So when you start talking about numbers and measurability, we know that's scalable. That's okay. We've produced a program. How do you then say, this is a course. This is something people can take. This is something that should reach the masses. How do we roll this out to Hispanic men? How do we roll this out to other underrepresented folks in that space? But it's having the tough conversation. And usually when we quote the big numbers, everybody goes, that's somebody else's problem because that's too big for me. We go, no. Once again, we're going to come to you at the level in which you understand it, because to change it, we've got to start changing one mentality at a time. And those type of programs have to be incorporated into wherever you work, because most of us, I'm fortunate, I work in Office of Diversity. We see a lot of folks that have a different background. But that's not the case in most of my career. Most of my career, I was one of only sitting in a room. And that's what drove me to the space to say, why was I the only one sitting in that room when I know there's other capable people that I'm walking past to get to that room? And how do we show people this is in the metrics? Everything is measurable. All I did was show you your workforce numbers and break them down for you so that you can tell me what the problem is so we can solve it together. Because I just want to help us solve this problem together. And we come at it from a partnership because we need you to solve this problem.
Absolutely.
So that we're not 20 years from now still talking about the same story.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. And I love what you said in terms of having those tough conversations. And when I think about the tough conversations, one of the most effective ways to begin to illuminate what culture is so that you can change it is by storytelling. And I think a lot of times those stories go unknown, untold, unheard. And so it's interesting because, to your point, when we take a look over our career path and our journey, I can remember specifically the points where I started to muffle my voice. Yes. And I remember because I realized that there wasn't really a welcoming for what I had to say. I didn't understand why at first. And then I'm a pretty quick study, so then I figured it out. But I think it goes back to, if we're having these conversations and they're uncomfortable, we have to lean into the uncomfortable. And you made me think about an executive roundtable that I was moderating a couple years back. And there was a pivotal moment that occurred so beautifully, and it illustrated the impact and importance of our work on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so what happened was there was a real-time life decision moment that happened for one of the executives. And so he was a white male executive. And the thing that stood out particularly was he was faced with a tough hiring decision between two candidates. One was a white male who would, seemingly fit into the existing company practices, the way of doing business, beliefs. And I want to replace that for culture, just so we kind of understand what I'm talking about. And then there was a Black woman who, despite being the strongest candidate, was anticipated to not be readily accepted by the company's clients. And this was by his own admission. So I didn't make this story up. And so the discussion that we had was really, and that we're having today, really revolves around the deeper implications of such choices and how they resonate with the company's values and the broader goals of inclusivity. And so I was so moved by this conversation because what he shared was, he had to make a decision. And in that moment, he decided that he was going to make the tough decision, which is a conversation he had to have with himself. So sometimes an external, but this was an internal conversation. Mm-hmm. And he moved forward to hire the Black woman, but he didn't stop there. What he said was he recognized the challenges that she would face. And he committed to actively sponsoring and mentoring her to ensure that she was not only successful in her role, but that she could thrive and see herself as a part of leadership. And so what's so amazing about this decision not only changed the trajectory of a woman I will never meet, I don't even know who she is, but it changed and it set a powerful precedent within that company about what it really meant to be an ally, to stand, in a space and to advocate for someone that otherwise would not have that space. And so there, clear example of no less competent, in fact, the strongest candidate, but there was a need for not only a conversation, but which brings me to the next thing, which is the importance of mentorship and sponsorship and how essential they are for us in our career progression. And even though we know that this is important, there's still an underrepresentation and a lack of access to such opportunities. And so my question here is, what do we do about this, lady? How do we make sure that we are creating, advocating for, supporting these mentorship and sponsorship opportunities that not only support advancement for those mid-level positions, but really create a pathway to leadership roles that can continue to shape, quote unquote, practices, beliefs, actions, culture of organizations and companies?
There, in numbers, one of the things that I have in looking and preparing for this, what was important is that companies who actually focus and committed to diversity actually bring about a much greater competitive edge against companies who don't. And it also means that it's also stated that women that are in leadership positions increase the financial profit of an organization because of that form of diversity, because women are in leadership. When you also bring in ethnicity into it or other cultures, it also talked about it increased the profitability of a company by 30%. So when you do that, you have a commit with how that will happen when a committed leadership is willing to impart how to get here. Because the story that you shared, the stories that you both told about the pivotal moments and times in your life, I've seen it in mine as well over the years of being in a professional. It really takes that. And so a company who does not want to grow, who does not plan to have millennials and Gen Xers come in, it also shared that 69% of millennials want to be a company that is diverse. So when you look at what the millennials and the Gen Xers want to do, and we have to definitely mentor them and prepare them. And Jagina, you spoke about it, how your transition came about in college, I believe, how that professor spoke. I remember working for the Urban League of Greater Cincinnati, and my son, who is now 34 years old and living in LA, he was a part of the National Achievers or the Thurgood Marshall organization at that time. And they were taken at the age of 8, 9, 10. Before then, actually taken to events where they were taught how to do those things. Just to make sure that when they got into places where they would know how to pick up which fork or knife, that goes way back. So I'm saying that the mentoring piece just doesn't start when you get to that level. So now that we see that, mentoring goes back to when they're children. So I really am very proud to work for an organization, Urban League of Broward County, who has been about advocacy for years. It didn't just start. So we do have an educational, we actually have 6 pillars, but one I want to focus on is education. And that level, education is the area where we actually take children, elementary through high school, and we introduce them to things. So we talk about mentoring, it starts way back. And so I'm so proud that we actually engage our youth, give them a platform to speak, give them a platform to learn, give them a platform outside of the daily routine of what they get in school, and introduce them to opportunities and put them before great leaders and great people. Get a chance to come to our boardroom and see what it's like to see our leader in place, or to say, or to do interviews. This is really sometimes striking, to have people who interview for positions and say, they should have done their homework. Maybe they didn't. But to realize who our leader is, our Dr. Jermaine Smith Ball, and to say, that's her? She looks that young? And I said, yes, and she's been doing this for a number of years. So, and she in turn also takes women and she leads them, she pours into them. And I don't care what level you're on. I don't care if you were doing direct service. I don't care if you were in her community. I don't care if you cross her path. One way or another, she's going to spend time and give you direct contact and do the same thing. So what does that mean? If our leader is doing it, the expectation for the organization, for the Urban League of Broward County to do the same thing. And which means that the board has to be doing the same thing. You can't have two different visions and expect to accomplish one goal. It is a single framed vision following, and we're all swimming in the same direction, going with the leadership of this organization. And so we're, each of us who are in leadership are doing the same thing. So it trickles down through the organization. And I think I may have answered that question.
Yeah, so I love that, Donna. And I think when you talk about those statistics and how when we invest in diversity, how it actually has an implication, a positive impact on profitability. And I think there's a point for us to just kind of like amplify. We can integrate profit and purpose, right? And I think sometimes that is often not understood or maybe not even entertained. But something else you said in terms of how early, how soon do we start mentorship, professional development, if you will. And I think it's one of those things where, again, going back to shaping culture. First and foremost, Jagina, you talked about, younger generations. And the one thing that I will tell you is that they're here for it. They're here for everything that we told them they could have. And so I think the beauty of this journey of diversity, equity, inclusion is that a lot of the things that we've been advocating for and fighting for, they're actually living in the promise of that. And we still have older mindsets that sometimes we want to scare them away and say, well, wait, remember, you can't. And so the great thing is they're not going to settle for anything less than what we told them. And so now what we have to do is make sure when we're in position in organizations that we are being advocates to make sure we're walking our talk, because the younger generation they're walking into these organizations and these companies, and that is what they're looking for. And so the thing for every leader that's listening to understand is they are not going to accept less. And so it's either we evolve or we become extinct, right? And we've seen that movie several times played before. And so when we think about this and when we think about what those professional development pathways look like, we have to shape them based on what it is we want as our outcomes, what it is we understand as their needs, but more importantly, we have to go in and check in with our practices, because a lot of times these professional development tracks and pathways are shaped by unconscious biases, by systemic barriers, and they're disproportionately they have a disproportionate effect on underrepresented groups. And so I think what I want to hear from both of you ladies who are veterans also in the HR space, how can organizations really make sure that talent development programs are not only equitable, but accessible to all employees, regardless of where they may sit? And I'm not going to just say race and gender, but where they may sit on the quote unquote org chart.
Yeah, I love that question because we're tackling a lot of that right now. And so I really am centered around diversity insights. My entire career has been about metrics. And when I came into this space, one of the things that I found so interesting is that people didn't understand their workforce. I was like, what are these numbers? We keep repeating them at such a high level, but if I'm marginalized, I'm swallowed up within that number. First, we got to carve it out. We got to talk about it. So we always go back to that uncomfortable conversation. And we've had those conversations with those that lead in that space, because oftentimes those that lead in that space, they may not be in that marginalized space. And so they don't know about those unconscious biases. We're fortunate at the Cleveland Clinic because we have a woman who absolutely comes to us wanting that knowledge, wanting her team educated in cultural competency. Acknowledging your own biases has to start first, because if you want to produce better quality candidates coming through the door, you've got to acknowledge when you're already kind of, taking somebody off. Because I loved your story, Dr. Fleming, when you have someone standing there and they're having that conversation in their head, that's some true integrity, because they didn't even have to tell you about that conversation. So I'm telling you how I'm processing this, and I had to really deep dive into that. That's what cultural competency really looks like. When you're telling me about a conversation, I don't even have the rights to the key to understand that you were having that conversation, but you're willing to tell me in front of everyone because you want the conversation out there. And I love seeing that with teams that say, educate us in a space because I want to feel uncomfortable. That's where the growth happens. Growth happens in uncomfortability because it makes us grapple with the thoughts that we may have, and we think that other people have them, and then when people start having those conversations out loud, not reacting, you got to let them get it out, because sometimes we can shut people back down by going, what, I knew it. We don't try to point fingers, because that's not what this is about. We're trying to move the needle for that individual. Like what you said, you don't even know that woman. I don't know her either, and I felt like this as soon as you said that, like, because you opened the door for one. And I know that happened to me. I'm dating myself a little. 20 years ago, I became a director at an organization that was primarily not of color. It was less than 5% of color. And I remember when I was made the director of business intelligence there, you better believe I was hiring women of color, because I'm like, the door was open for me, not because I went and looked for unqualified. I went and said, I don't want to look at their name when you send this through. Send me only what they were doing. And I practiced it and said, now whoever walks through that door, okay, I'm glad that I didn't look and qualify based on their color. And you automatically saw the diversity walk through the door. So when we go out and tell people, we're like, we're aspirational. We're telling you we want to see your diverse representation. But if you're doing it correctly, you will see it naturally, because you take the piece that's the bias off the table, and you have to check yourself with that too. So we practice what we preach as leaders, because if not, then it looks like we're just trying to fill people, and we get to that, well, you're just pulling unqualified individuals. So we take that off the table and say, no, we're going to give you a script that we're following, and we're going to say, try it, see if it works for you, because you're going to notice diversity shows up, and you weren't even trying to make it show up, because it's natural to be diverse. What we're doing, the opposite, is what's harder. We're challenging you to say, take that bias off the table and do what children do. I always say D&I was taught to us when we were born, but we took added on all this. I didn't know who I was playing with when I was 5. I played because I liked you. So that's what we're trying to get people to do. And we have those conversations with our leaders in that space, because it's necessary for them to say, hey, if I can't take that off the table and bring you the best candidates in this space because I have a bias that I haven't grappled with yet, then we need to have those open conversations, and we let them have that brave space. No judgment. Let's have a brave space conversation.
Absolutely. I think you made me think about, like, diversity happens just because we walk in the room, right? By way of who we are, we're going to achieve that. Equity happens when we choose to be fair, and the inclusion happens when we invite other people to share in experiences that we otherwise may not have had with them or without them. So I love that. I think something that we have to talk about, right? Because I know that a lot of times we're wanting to make a quote unquote business case, and we all have done it. We start with the numbers, and they are important because, as I said, they tell us a story. But the one thing I want to make sure that we do is we maintain the humanity of this conversation that we're talking about. Because just like in, as you know, in healthcare, when we start to identify people by their diagnosis instead of by their names, we lose common touch with them. And I want to make sure this conversation does not lose that common touch that we needed to have. And so I like to say, when we're talking about, when we're in the space of this work, we have to first locate ourselves in the work. And I think when we locate ourselves in the work, we're able to see, how does this impact me? Where are my tendencies to be biased, right? Because we all, and also, where are those things that I'm probably holding back because it's a tough conversation that I don't want to have for whatever reason I don't want to have them. And then identifying what's my leadership responsibility in this. And I think that we have a responsibility, because we were asked to be on this panel and have this conversation, to really open up the atmosphere, open up the conversation, open up leaders in their mental spaces to really look at this work in a way that maybe they haven't looked at it before. And so with that being said, I really want everyone that's listening in to kind of think about, when you look at your network of people that you would call for ideas, that you would call for advice or information, or even if you had an opportunity that you would share it with, who's in that network? And how intentional have you been about? So I know they thought they were going to ask us questions, but I want to ask them a question. How intentional are you about expanding your sphere of understanding and your sphere of reach so that you're touching people that you wouldn't otherwise touch? Because in there is an experience that you wouldn't otherwise know that you needed to have, because that's what's going to shape this conversation. And because we're talking about talent development and advancement. One of the things that I did coming into this conference today, I invited people that may not have seen themselves as a leader, because for us it's reshaping that conversation around leadership, and especially the younger generation. And I want them to follow up and tell me, what didn't we talk about that we need to pay attention to, because we're shaping this dialogue for them. And so when I go back to this question about professional development and how do we really make sure that we are making it more inclusive and we're thinking about it, I think a big part of it is to really drop back a little bit from the context of leadership and really think about, how are we preparing people to solve problems and create solutions? Because at the core, that is what leadership is. And at the core, when we use diversity, equity, and inclusion in its most productive way, we are most creative, we are most innovative, and we're able to solve problems. So with that, I want to move us to, Donna, you talked about research earlier. And another thing that research has shown us is that diverse teams are more equipped to navigate complex challenges.
They do.
And make better decisions. And so how can we leverage diversity to mitigate risk and improve strategic decision-making processes? And you can talk specifically to your industry, or you can talk generally.
Some of the things that we do, I want to just backtrack just a little bit to one of the questions that Jagina answered earlier, when we were talking about what do we do and how do we develop, from no matter where you are in the organization. We have what we call, it's called LIT, and people can join it, and it's from all levels in the organization. And what LIT means is learn, inform, and train. Learn, inform, and train. So this particular committee, because that's kind of what it is, and I love one of the things that we do here, and I'm going to get you a question, but this was just like burning in me to share, is that this committee actually identifies training that will benefit anyone in the organization. So we have it whereby the training could end up being that we offer are trainings that people have heard about. I'm talking about staff have heard about that they want to partake in, or some of our leadership has said this would be great for us to do, identifying training. We actually come together. We'll either do it over lunch and learn, or we will do it in the course of a day. We are committed to making sure that the training is taking place. Professional development is taking place. So it's not always about how do I become a better HR leader? How do I become a better leader? Even if because the whole mindset is no matter who you are, you're a leader. No matter, because you're going to lead something, even if it's your own personal life, you're leading something or someone. If you're a parent, you're leading your children. No matter where you are, you're leading. So I just want to make sure that we have a continuous learning environment here, and opportunities that come up where they're able to go to different conferences, able to participate on different boards, able to participate in different committees in the community, to show the diversity, or to make sure that we're being intentional about allowing these opportunities to take place. So that it was just burning in me to say that. And so also getting back to the question about risk is making sure that when we do have others when I say others that didn't grow up in my parents' household, I just want to say that didn't grow up in my parents' household with the ideologies and the trainings that they gave to me, that I don't make sure that I'm boxed in that way, and that I'm not being inclusive to hear what others have to say. Because in order for the workplace to grow and to get to a point to show that DEI across the board is working, no matter whether you're a nonprofit, for-profit, entrepreneurial, or whatever, we all need each other. Regardless of what people may think, we need each other. And so if we're about the business of making sure that liability is reduced, then let's hear what others have to say. Let them feel free. Let each person feel free to share their ideas and their opinions. And because that also deals with the mental health of an individual. If I have to keep everything inside, at some point in time, you keep pressing that boil, and at some point in time, it's going to burst. So if we allow the environment, it could be, they may come into my office and just want to share whatever they want. I make sure that when you come into my office as an HR professional, you can come and talk about anything you want. Am I going to hold that against you? No, I won't, because you needed a place to come to. All of our leaders we have what's called an open door policy, and people are able to share, because when it comes down to liability and risk, the question when you get before an attorney is, what did you know, and when did you know it, and what did you do about it?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be able to answer those questions. Yes, I knew it. This is what I did. This is how it was handled. And yes, it's documented. So when we start talking about risk and liability, it's reduced by the idea that I have been heard and that something was done about it.
Yeah. Thank you. Jagina, was there anything you had to share on that?
I loved all of that. I loved all of that because I find that, especially in the space of DE&I within HR, we wear these dual hats because we are trying to make sure that you feel seen, heard, and understood. But at the same time, we know that there has to be accountability. There has to be accountability in spaces. And oftentimes we'll have people come into our space and we go, well, we need you to reframe kind of how you're looking at things, because we have to tell people, just because you wear black or brown skin doesn't mean that all of a sudden whatever you're telling us is just right. It's not by default. We need each other. And that's what I loved about that. We all need each other. And we just recently had this within our department. We looked around, we had all females in our group, and we said, we need a man. We can't think like a man. Like, we don't have that perspective. We don't walk through life like that. So there are things we might not be thinking of that when a man talks about it, we go, oh yeah, no one tells me I'm aggressive when I walk into a room, but we don't think necessarily in the same shape and space that you do. And so it's just necessary. So even though we're in a space where females tend to be, not looked at as, you can be a leader and you can be in this space, and we see the numbers dwindle. We all know that as we move forward. We're also aware that without certain people in our lives, one of my early mentors was a white male who used to drive a motorcycle. And I tell people that all the time. I said, because he knew he didn't have to look like me to help open the door for me. And that allyship is so important. And it changed the course of my career, because that individual happened to say, hey, I realize that I'm the one who's able to get you in that room. And that's the key, is we all need each other. If I'm just looking for people that look like me in that space, then I'm narrowing my vision. And so we need each other, but we also need to be in a space where we hear each other. And that's where we can, we can all come in a room. Our chief diversity officer likes to say, you walk in, you invite me to the party, but did you ask me to dance? Like, I'm here, but everybody's acting like, well, you got the invitation. That's good enough. It's important that we ask everybody to dance.
Yeah, I love that. And so, what I love about this part of the conversation, oftentimes I've been asked, and I'm sure you have too, what is the true value of DE&I? And I think when we have conversations like this, we help take it beyond compliance and representation, because it's so much more than that, right? And so if, for those, I like to say, for the critics, right, or the skeptics that are really thinking like, well, what's in it for me, or why is this really of value? And I'll give an example of how it helps to, when we talk about creativity and innovation in the space of market reach, it's invaluable, because diversity, and then if you take it a step further, diverse leadership helps organizations and companies to better understand and engage with different market segments, different consumer demographics. And when we engage with these different markets and these different populations, then we're able to enhance the loyalty that people have to what it is that we're producing in the market. And so I think that's important. And I'm reminded of there's a part of one of the books that Curtis Jackson, will go by Curtis Jackson here today, also 50 Cent wrote. He talks about when he did his deal with Vitamin Water and how the flavors that they wanted to introduce and where they were gonna like actually put this product into market. And he was like, well, first of all, people in the hood won't drink lychee and all these other things, but if you put, grape and these things that we all grew up drinking, like quarter waters or what have you, it's gonna sell. And I think that the sales were like beyond what they could even imagine, because he was able to tap into a market based on his lived experience as to what would thrive and what wouldn't thrive. And you can think about that in terms of how we're how the Urban League provides support and assistance to the community, and how Cleveland Clinic provides patient care. And so when you have people that can understand the patients and that can really see it from their perspective, there's a level of trust. And if you're unapproachable, then you're unsafe. And that's not just in healthcare, that's in any arena. And so when we think about why safety and this ability to be vulnerable is so important, is because I had someone tell me, why should I spend time with a $75,000 employee when I'm out creating billions of dollars and whatever? And I was like, because that $75,000 employee could cost you $1 billion problem because you don't understand their context. And so I think the conversation today, when we talk about diverse talent development and advancement, it really is a conversation of how do we think about what our organization does as a mission? How do we think about who we're serving, and how do we best position people to bring their best, brightest, and most effective ideas to being able to be of service? And a lot of times those ideas and that way of doing business, if you will, it's the context that we are not considering. There's sometimes the people that we're actually serving and we forgot to ask them, what does this look like, feel like? And so I thank you for this conversation, because we could go on and on and on about this, but I think we're almost at time. And I think the thing I want to end with is, when we think about the work that we are doing in the space of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, what is it that we have to continue to quote unquote press the gas on? And I would say over the next 6 months. And what do leaders have to really put their finger on the pulse of if we're going to continue to move in the forward direction?
I'll go first with that. I would say that, speaking on behalf, especially of the Urban League of Broward County, and you said the next 6 months and have our foot on the accelerator. Even this REDI conference, we've got our foot on the accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have our foot on the accelerator because the questions, the conversations that I have been listening to since it started today, all talks about where we need to go. And so as you shared, Dr. Fleming, which was really, I really love what you said when you said you invited people that that would not necessarily maybe know about this particular conference or may not believe that they need to hear it, but you put your foot on the accelerator, and you're on our board of directors. So you put your foot on the accelerator and you help to extend the message of the Urban League. And so I just believe that it's to me, it's like being a community of learning. You never stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get to a point of realizing that there's never a time in our life that we don't know who we're going to need going along this path.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, but if we are open to receiving, we will get what we need when we need it.
Thank you, Donna.
I have to second that, Donna. I love everything you said about just making sure that you continually invite the people to the conversation, because that's first and foremost. They can't contribute if they're not even in the room. But also, I would say continuing to fund these initiatives, because we have seen in the last year, and sad because we all know where we were a couple years ago, sitting in our houses staring at those TVs. And I remember having conversations with my colleagues who were like, oh man, this is so sad what we're seeing on TV. And I stopped and literally said, what's different about this time? You got to tell us, because we need to know why y'all saw this one. And we would have open dialogue, conversations we had not had before because we needed to have them, and the funding started and the backing started and we saw it happen. We can't take our foot off the pedal because, oh, look like everybody happy. We can't do that. We have to continue to say, fund these initiatives, fund these programs, put your money where the program is and really show, and especially in the Florida area, this can't be something taken off the table because politics are always going to move around. No matter what you believe, that's always going to continue to happen. Diversity and inclusion, that's innately in us from the beginning. And we have to make sure that we're funding those initiatives and actually saying that no matter what, I'm still going to support these arenas that bring these voices together.
Absolutely.
Dr. Fleming, one last thing that I want to share. And if people are listening today and they don't know how to do it, they can tap in, reach back to the Urban League or tap in to Jagina from her organization, any place, to you, to others, but it will not change won't happen unless you actually say that you need it and then do something about it. So it's not just identifying the need, it's actually operationalizing or executing a plan.
Absolutely. I guess if I had a share on this one, I would say we need to maintain an openness to the iterative, to being iterative in this process and in this work, right? And on this journey, because I think when we continuously work to better understand needs of individuals and communities, the individual and collective needs, that is, the practices and how those practices are either leading us forward or taking us backwards. And I think the third piece is really looking at the outcomes, right? And I think a lot of times what happens is things get lost in translations because we're not clear about what our expectations are. And so I think it's a lot of times the conversation halts at the qualitative measures that we talk about with DEI, but I think it's a matter of us creating a mixed approach so that the conversation, we can talk about our outcomes and what our desires are, but we can also talk about the impact and the implications that we have along this journey. So I want to thank you for this conversation. I want to thank you for the work that you do in the space of talent development and advancement. And for everyone that's here, thank you for attending. Thank you for being a part of this conference and this conversation. Especially want to thank you for attending this power panel. And please take a few moments when we're done to fill out the survey. It's going to appear on your screen. We need you to do that because when you fill out the survey, that lets us know what kinds of things that spoke to you, but also where you want us to continue to dig in as we're continuing on this journey to do this work, because it is a commitment and it's a steadfast commitment. So thank you. And please stay on for the closing remarks from Ms. Kirsty Miles, Esquire, who is the Policy and Government Relations Director for the Urban League of Broward County. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us.
When you think of the number of people that come through wearing our Cleveland Clinic badge,
I am one.
I am one. I am one.
I am one of over 60,000.
60,000 caregivers.
we have all those diverse personalities.
Unique.
Extraordinary.
I didn't choose.
This is who I am.
This is who I am.
Those diverse cultures, those diverse traditions.
I sometimes face assumptions.
Every one of us brings something to work every day, and everybody comes with the intention of doing a great job.
When we hire a diverse population of caregivers, then we're able to learn with each other. Once a person knows that their truth is going to be respected, we can be in each other's space and not have to hide significant portions of ourselves.
My parents are from India. Being here in the States, I know I've changed a lot. I've cut my hair, I go out to work. This is who I am.
We have different skills, and you need to develop those skills to communicate well with a very diverse patient population. I have an accent from my Latin background, but I also have an accent from my hearing loss. And I need to overcome those things. I'm here to help their patients. That is what makes me feel proud of my calling.
When you strip away all the layers of
diversity is how we are different. We all connect at the most basic level, and that's the human level.
I came out when I was 21 to my parents. My wife and I, we have 4-month-old triplets, 2 girls and 1 boy. They were in the NICU for almost 3 weeks. It's a completely different experience when you're the one providing the care and then like the one watching your loved one laying in the bed. Everybody deserves the best treatment they can get.
So creating a culture that is warm, that is inviting, is just something that we have to strive for relentlessly every single day.
Every one of us.
Every one of us.
Every one of us.
A caregiver.
Every one of us a caregiver.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Urban League of Broward County's 3rd annual Ready to Lead conference, powered by BISA. I am Kirsty Miles, and I serve as the Policy and Government Relations Director for the Urban League of Broward County. Listen, you could have been anywhere in the world today, but you have chosen to be present today to learn, lead, and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies that will undoubtedly propel your business and the culture forward. And for that, we at the Urban League of Broward County are eternally grateful. This year's theme is standing on business. That means being resolute in your convictions and integrity, holding steadfast to your ethical standards and social responsibility, and more importantly, showing others the dependability of your brand and your word. For our allies, I know that there's hesitation or a fear of cancel culture. We're worried about the backlash that we may receive, and we don't want to be Karens. And listen, at times, standing for racial equity, diversity, and inclusion may require going against popular opinion, challenging the status quo, or just standing on business. Listen, it demands courage, conviction, and a commitment to doing what's right, even when it's not the easiest path to take. To quote the late, great Audre Lorde, she once said, "It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." Our aim here at the REDI conference is crystal clear. We want to celebrate our unique abilities, knowing that by uplifting those marginalized voices, we in turn further equitable changes in business culture. Today, I hope you have amassed all the tools necessary to, 1, create and execute action-oriented efforts to combat racism, sexism, colorism, ageism, homophobia, and all the other hosts of isms that may be in your workplace, thus creating an inclusive workplace for all. Secondly, I hope you can identify and challenge discriminatory practices in the companies and organizations that you serve in. Then I hope that you will be able to dismantle structures in workplace culture, career advancement, procurement, that positions some communities to prosper while others are marginalized and excluded altogether. Listen, when you win, we all win. And I also hope that you've developed strategies that promote simple, systemic, sustainable, and scalable changes. And then tell a friend to tell a friend. So if you need a refresh on your REDI knowledge, all of the panels from today's conference and previous conferences will be available on demand at readytolead.org, along with our REDI Toolkit. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also take time to thank our sponsors. Thank you so much to BISA, Bank Insurance and Securities Association, Cleveland Clinic, City Furniture, JM Family Enterprises, and Memorial Healthcare System. A special thank you to all of our moderators and panelists for moving that culture forward. And more importantly, thank you for reaffirming your commitment to standing on business when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you for working with us and attending the Urban League of Broward County's 3rd annual Ready to Lead conference. So I'll see you next year, same time, same place. Make it a fabulous day.